Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing one of the most important political scientists in Brazil and a dear friend, João Roberto Martins Filho, who I had the pleasure of first meeting years ago when he was a visiting scholar at the University of California, Riverside, and I was working on my master's degree in Latin American Studies at Cal State University, Los Angeles. João Roberto Martins Filho is professor emeritus in the Department of Social Science at the Federal University of São Carlos with a doctorate in social science from the State University of Campinas. He is the author of many classical works, including an English translation, Student Movement and the Military Dictatorship in 1987, The Palace and the Barracks, 1995, with a second edition in 2019, which is, for me, one of the most original studies on the Brazilian military dictatorship. The Brazilian Navy and the Age of Battleships, 1895 to 1910, published in 2010, and State Secrets, the British Government and Torture in Brazil, 2018, and a second edition in 2020. He was the president of the Brazilian Defense Studies Association from 2006 to 2008, and has had postdoctoral fellowships at the University of California, Los Angeles, and the Center for Brazilian Studies at the University of Oxford, among many other places. He has also held the Rio Branco Chair in International Relations at King's College, London, and is twice the Rui Barbosa Chair in Brazilian Studies at the University of Leiden in Netherlands. João, I'm so glad that you could join us today on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for the organization of this interview, Camilo. I would like to thank you, and thanks a lot for you, for all people that are working in the Brazilian future and other projects.
So let's jump in. I think everyone's really curious to understand this question. With the heavy military presence, the Bolsonaro government reignited discussions about the involvement of the armed forces in national politics and their commitment to democracy. Can we start with an historical perspective of the involvement of the armed forces in Brazilian history? Is there a consistent story since the declaration of the Republic in 1889?
Well, in a certain sense, the latest intervention of the military in politics in this 4 years of Bolsonaro government is a return of the repressive. We thought that the people that are studying the military in the last 30 years, we thought that the repressed would not return again, but that happened before our eyes, and we were not able to understand, to view this. When we perceived this was too late. The military were present in the main events of the history of the Republic in Brazil. Since the proclamation, a Proclamação da República, which was a military coup, followed by two military administrations, Deodoro da Fonseca and Floriano Peixoto. And again, in 1930, the intervention of the tenentes in the 1920s, the revolution of 1930, the coup of the Estado Novo in 1937, the coup that against Getúlio Vargas in 1945, the attempt of coup in 1954 that resulted in the suicide of Getúlio Vargas, the attempt of avoiding the inauguration of Juscelino Kubitschek in 1955, and the failed coup of 1961. Finally, they finally arrived in power in 1964 to have 21 years of a military regime. But I have a personal view of their participation, because in all those moments, except the last, the coup, the military were not able to occupy the center of power after the intervention. So there is a tendency among people that study the military to almost equal the political history of the Republic in Brazil with the military, as if they were the owners of power for all those years. And I don't agree with that vision. This is an exaggeration of the role of the military in the history of the Republic. Let's see. Between the end of the Marechal Floriano Peixoto government in 1892, and the revolution of 1930, we did not have a military government. We have what we call here the República Velha, the old republic, and the owners of the power, the powers that be, the people in bourgeoisie in São Paulo and Minas that control the coffee agriculture and industry in a certain sense. In the Vargas area, 1930 to 1945, the military were present, but it was a civilian government, in my view. If not, why the most important general of this period, the 1930s, Góes Monteiro, created the motto, we must have the politics of the army, not the politics in the army. So he was planning to have a central position in the state. But the army was very divided and it was in a process of professionalization that was not completed yet. The situation started to change after the Estado Novo coup in 1937. But the regime was still civilian. It was Vargas that, in the end, decided to align Brazil with the allies in the war, with the United States in the war.
Even though some of the sectors of the military wanted to ally with the Axis powers.
And Góes Monteiro was pro-Nazi. So he was the most important general. This decision shows that Vargas, in the end, was the one that was in command. With the end of the war, the generals removed Vargas, and the second most important general at the time, Eurico Dutra, was elected president. Again, against another military, the Air Force General Eduardo Gomes. But it's important to remember that, or to register that between 1945 and 1964, Brazil was a civilian democracy with regular elections and ample popular participation. The military were defeated in all the attempts of coup that I have explained above. And the coup finally opened a period of military dictatorship. But they were not able to do what they planned to do. And until the mid-1940s, they not even planned to be directly in power. But after that, in the 50s, they developed this idea in the Escola Superior de Guerra of controlling power. So in a certain sense, I think that Alfred Steppen is right when he said that there was in 1964 a change of pattern. The military were able to create problems and try to create political crisis and to press the government, but they were not able to be the government. And that has changed with the military coup of March 31st in that happened in 1964. So this
in
is
fact,
the idea.
João, you and I have had this conversation before. You're one of a group of scholars, and I actually join with you in this idea that the military that came to power in 1964 represented a military dictatorship, whereas there are other scholars that argue that it was a Brazilian civilian military dictatorship, trying to emphasize the ways in which civilians were involved in the governing, because the Congress was open relatively. There were elections. There was members of the cabinet who were civilians. Why is it that you insist that the period of 1964 to 1985 was a military dictatorship as opposed to a civilian military dictatorship?
So in the two periods, we are against the current because we don't. I don't think that the military dominated Brazilian political history since 1889.
Right.
So I'm trying to emphasize that that was a time of civilian hegemony. But in 1964, I think that they staged a coup and they were able to control power in a question of years. I think that in 1965 that was clear already. And why? Because the dynamics of the crisis of this regime, dictatorship, and the structure of power of the regime, they were both, in essence, militarized. And it's obvious that there was a strong support of the civilians, the dominant classes in Brazil. But in the end, the decisions were made by the generals. And the civilians were, in a certain sense, in a second position. This is very clear when beginning of the government, first days of the government, after the coup, former governor Carlos Lacerda went with the owner of this O Estado de São Paulo newspaper. Both were the civilians leaders of the mobilization. And they went to the house of General Castelo Branco to have a conversation with him. He was already president of Brazil. And the general just gave them a bad time. He arrived late. He was in the house, but he arrived late. And in the beginning of the conversation, it was clear to Carlos Lacerda, who was a very clever man, that this time something went wrong. Because he was one of the possible candidates for presidency after the coup in 1965. And he suddenly sensed that something has changed. The guys now have come to stay.
Right.
And this is a very nice tale. When you read his book, its memories, you can see that he was suddenly convinced that they have put the military in power.
So today, in recent years, under the Bolsonaro government, there was a return to a celebration of March 31st as a special holiday, recognizing the taking of power and what the military called the Revolution of 1964. In fact, Bolsonaro, during the impeachment process of Dilma Rousseff, when he declared his vote, when he was then a congressman, he declared his vote in favor of the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff in name of the Revolution of 1964, in other words, the coup d'etat. Now, the current president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has called for there not to be celebrations by the military of this date. But why does the military still cling to March 31st as such a symbolic moment for the armed forces? Why is that so important for them?
Well, this is a question of honor for them because they were in power and they know that there is a lot of problems in the memory of this regime. They don't call it a dictatorship. They call it an authoritarian regime. And but in fact, this is just a chapter of the history the military tell on the Brazilian history. They have their own version of the Brazilian history. And in this version, to return to the beginning of the Republic, they admit or they defend that they were the founders of the Republic. And this is interesting because they also say they are the founders of the nation. And they put the moment when the nation was founded in 1648, when they defeated the Brazilian army, the Brazilian people, the Brazilian nation, and the nation was created in 1822. And Brazil declared his independence of Portugal. But there was this word that the Portuguese called the Portuguese that lived here, Brasileiros. And so the army got that and said, well, the Brazilian nation, white people, black people, and Indians, they founded the nation in the Battle of Guararapes in 1648 in Pernambuco. So they were present at the creation of the nation, supposedly, and of the republic, which they were.
Just to clarify for our listeners, this was a war against the occupation of Holland of the northeastern part of Brazil, and this was a process of expelling the Dutch who had occupied the country in the 17th century. So, as you're saying, they're declaring themselves to be the person to first expel the major international force that had occupied the country, the Dutch, and then this symbolizes 200 years before the actual independence of Brazil from Portugal, the founding of the nation. Interesting.
Yeah, it's like that battle that Rosino, I don't remember the name, that the Serbians say that it was the foundation of the Serbian nation in the 15th century. So, and they declared the day of the army, the 19th of April, which is the date the Brazilians defeated the Dutch. It's interesting to talk a bit about this battle because it was an important military victory because the Dutch were the best military, they had the best military at that time, mid 16th century or 17th century. And but there was no Brazilian army at that time and no Brazilian government and no Brazilian nation. So the Portuguese were able to defeat the Dutch, which was a military feat. And there is a very important book about this. But in the book, the historians use the word brasileiros, that was the word that they used at the time. Portuguese referring to Brazilians, to Portuguese that live in Brazil. And so they got this word Brazilians to say, Brasileiros to say, well, we founded the nation. This is very arrogant. They think that they can have their own history of Brazil, and they put themselves in a position, they are the founders and the protectors of the nation. I just watched a lot of lives of those generals to write about them. And they say that the mission of the Brazilian army historically is to save and to protect the Brazilian people, even against the Brazilian people will.
So this leads us to the question of the military regime and the fact that during the 21 years in which the armed forces was in power, there was torture, kidnapping, and murder of political opponents and generalized repression. However, the Brazilian military the government never has tried its military dictators and officers in charge of the country as they did in Argentina. Why has this never happened? And in your opinion, what were the consequences of never really finding guilty the armed forces for having overthrown a democratically elected government and installed a military regime for 21 years?
Well, let just me show you the cover of a book I just published on the Malvinas War. Brazil and the Malvinas War. The transition in Argentina, because you have to go back to the transition from military power to democracy. That happened in the 1980s in Brazil and in Argentina. The transition in Argentina was a transition by collapse. And in Brazil, it was a transition absolutely controlled by the military. So they allowed the civilians to to take power after 10 years of transition. That was called the opening, the abertura, since that was created by Geisel, that was the fourth president of the Brazilian regime, and for the General Golbery, that they both understood that they could not maintain this regime forever. And if they did, maybe there was going to be a problem like the Argentinians had. And we must understand that first, I understand that the first trials that they have in Argentina, it was crimes of war, not crimes of the torture in the beginning. They tried people for their responsibility in the Malvinas War. And they were completely demoralized. And the Argentinians were very intelligent to take this window of opportunity and to try them. But there were some advances and some moments where those advancements were annulled. And after this, in several moments of going and coming back, they have tried all the generals. They have put them in jail, and some of them have died in jail.
Wow.
So this we did not have in Brazil. It's important to finish this, to have this chapter well understood. Some people were tried in Brazil for torture, but it was in the common justice. They found a way of having this without judging political crimes. Major Ustra was condemned in justice. The last condemnation he had was in 2021. He was twice condemned in justice. He was considered a kidnapper and a torturer. And there are some civilian policemen that were tried also. But this is very this is not enough. The most we got close to this was to the final report of the Brazilian Truth Commission. And you know what happened later. So
Right.
when Brazilians finally have an official version that's nowadays accepted even by the global organization, every time Bolsonaro said something about the Brazilian dictatorship, Globo cited the final report of the Truth Commission.
And for our listeners, it's important to keep in mind that the media conglomerate, supported the military regime in their newscasting and in their kind of political support for many years. So this shift in their attitude towards the military regime is very significant.
Yeah, and they even published an editorial some years ago saying that they made a mistake supporting the coup. Anyway, this is the official version now. It's very important. With all the limits that we have in the Ginny also worked with people of the National Truth Commission, the CNV, and I worked also. But we have to understand that this was a major advancement to have this. This was a major step forward to have this final report. And but anyway, they stated the responsibility of the all people involved to the top, to the presidents. The 5 presidents were cited, and they cited the father of one of those generals that started to help to create the Bolsonaro candidacy to president, General Echegoi. They cited his father as responsible for torture, and he was the only general, active duty general, that published a protest against the commission, against the report. And later, the family, because they decided his mother, the widow, and his brothers or sisters, I don't know. But after that, they sued the commission and tried to take the name of his father from their father from the document, and the justice said no.
Right. So mentioning Bolsonaro, why do you think the military allow themselves to get so deeply involved with a specific administration? Why did the military join with Bolsonaro in the last 4 years of governance?
Well, now we know that the change in the vision the military have about Bolsonaro and the relationship the generals have with Bolsonaro has started to change some years earlier. If you take the report was December 2014. December 2014, the final report of the National Truth Commission. And researching this, I was able to find in the beginning, January 2015, when the General Heleno was, General Mourão was transferring power from the command of the South in Brazil, that's in Rio Grande do Sul, to the guy that was to take his place. I found a newspaper article published in Rio Grande do Sul saying that, well, in the ceremony of change of command, there were plenty stars, a lot of generals, 4-star generals, but the guy that most called attention in this ceremony was a captain whose name is Bolsonaro. So this January 2015, they were completely aligned with Bolsonaro since this time. Well, they did not know that Bolsonaro would win the elections yet. But the other fact that's important is that November 2014, before the report, Bolsonaro was for the first time invited to the graduation in the military, in the Army Academy. And there he launched his candidacy to president in 4 years later.
Wow.
So you have to keep in mind that all those generals that were in the military academy at the same time of Bolsonaro, some in the same class, in the decades after this, they could not say they were friends of Bolsonaro because he was very, very demoralized with the military command. Because since he wrote a letter to the magazine Veja complaining on the military pays, he lied about this because he said he did not. And the army commander said, well, the army minister said at the time, I support this captain. Later, he discovered that he was lying. Wow. And so he made an order of day saying that the army does not have room for liars.
This is in 1977. So in the 77, I believe?
In 1987.
1987.
87, in the Sarney government.
Okay, and this is
civilian government.
And this is when Bolsonaro is in the army still, and he challenges the treatment of non-commissioned officers and pay scale, et cetera, and then is actually kicked out of the army, and eventually he's tried and he's found guilty, and then there's an appeal, and then he leaves the army. He's already a politician, and will then launch his career as a congressman.
Yeah, well, in 1987 there was an inquiry. He was condemned in this inquiry. His situation in the army was absolutely unbearable. He did not have any future in the army anymore. But later, and this is a problem that maybe we should talk about, the military justice absolveu.
They declared him not guilty, or they
he was considered not guilty by the military. So he left the army because he wanted to do this, and immediately he was elected for the vereador for Rio de Janeiro, and after that
city council.
Yeah, city council, and after that he spent 7 mandates in the Congress always having like 100,000 votes. And in the latest election, 400,000 votes. So if you wanted to be a general, you could not say that you were a friend of Bolsonaro's. And so those guys remained friends all those years, just hiding this from us. That's why some people say, well, you were the president of the Brazilian Defense Studies Association. How you did not perceive what was happening? Oh, I wasn't able to understand what was happening because they were hiding this very well from us. And now we understand. Now we can have all those uh, testimonies and lives and everything that can we were able to trace some of those movements. But in returning to my first phrases, there was a return of the repressed that we were not able to understand. Now we know how they act. Now we know the modus operandi of them. They did not stage a coup, but they supported a candidate, and they were able to be very present in the military government. Thousands of officers and generals occupying the most important positions in the government, like the Cabinet of Institutional Security, the GSI, like the Vice Presidency, and others, Secretary of Government. And so those generals, Mourão, Heleno, and Ramos and Braga Neto, were in the center of power. But there is a question that we must answer. Was that a military government? And I think that it wasn't. I think they have participated in the elections. They really have a center for decisions about the elections. I don't think they elected Bolsonaro as they saw themselves, the electors of Bolsonaro once more. And but they were important in his election. After that, they went to the government. Thousands of officers went to occupy places in the government. But the original plan did not work. Why? Because the plan was, there was an Argentine journalist that interviewed them between the first and the second round. And they talked to him because he was from Argentina. And they said, well, Bolsonaro now is a mature person. He's not going to be the guy that he was when he was a representative in the Congress. Now he's much more prepared to exercise power. And we really trust that he's going to be different. Well, the government started, and the guy was exactly the same.
Yeah.
Exactly the same. So, in my opinion, they were not able to control him. And I have a friend, I'll tell you this fact, that in the beginning of the government, we had a meeting of people that were studying what was happening. And he called me and said, you don't know what happened to me. I spent 3 hours talking to General Santos Cruz. And he did not allow me to say a word. He talked 3 hours explaining how they have elected Bolsonaro. And so my friend asked him, and who is going to control the crazy guy? And he said, I will. Wow. 6 months later, he was dismissed.
Yeah. So what were the political reasons why the military supported Bolsonaro? It seems it was a very strong concern that Lula, the Workers' Party, the left, would come to power. They certainly supported the attempt to overthrow the Lula government on January 8th, 2023. What are the motivations? What's the sentiment within the armed forces about the Workers' Party?
Well, we must return a bit for the context of the time. When Dilma was impeached, Bolsonaro not only said that he was supported the military dictatorship, but he said that his vote was in honor of Coronel Ustra. And he said, o pavor de Dilma Rousseff, because Dilma was tortured by this guy. And he was, you see, any people that has a minimum of humanity would say, I will not vote for this guy, because it's impossible to be to support torture in such a way. Anyway, at that time, there was this big support in the press, in the Congress, and in the judiciary, in the Ministério Público,
Prosecutor's office. It's hard to translate it exactly. Yeah.
yeah, the
Like the state
prosecutor's
prosecutor's office. Yeah.
Against the Workers' Party. And there were cases of corruption in the Workers' Party. Many of them have proved to be absolutely untrue. And there was this society in general was so against Lula and so against the Workers' Party that the military were just part of this. But the military had to confront the question of the Truth Commission that was specific to them. So if you add those this general context and the military context, you have a situation where there were no general that thought that maybe it was not such a good idea to support Bolsonaro. And so they all supported Bolsonaro. And they went with him, they stayed with him until the last minute of the government. Because people that say that defend the idea that they control and Bolsonaro, that they created Bolsonaro, and everything Bolsonaro was doing was their idea, they always said that there will be a time in which they will discard themselves of Bolsonaro. And that didn't happen. The last word of the Bolsonaro administration was the Vice President Mourão, which is a general, going to television to say goodbye, and because Bolsonaro has flight to Florida.
So in January 6, 2020, January 8, 2023, there was an attempted attempt to overthrow the legally elected government of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva a week after his inauguration, where for the 2.5 months prior to that date, thousands of people who supported Bolsonaro mobilized in front of army barracks calling for the military to intervene. And there was a large campaign that the Washington, Brazil office was a part of, organizing international public pressure against a coup in support of democracy in Brazil, against the possibility of the U.S. government backing in any way the military taking over. Why did the military coup fail? Because it seems as if the military wanted to intervene and in some way block Lula from coming to power. And as you've pointed out, there's a long tradition of doing that in Brazil. Why do you think the military was unsuccessful?
Well, for several reasons, but I'll cite just two. First, it's very difficult to stage a coup when a president was recently elected, because he has all the nation mobilized in support of him, and that did not happen in 1964. João Goulart took power in 1961, and the coup was staged in 1964, 3 years later. They got 3 years to prepare the nation to a coup. And the second was the international context. The United States was not pro-coup at this time. There was no Cold War at this time. And there is an important difference, because some years ago, I said in a debate we had in Latin American Perspectives that the military were not pro-Americans anymore. I was wrong. But situations changed. When the military was talking about resisting an invasion of the Americans in Amazon in 1995, they were talking about this. The United States was the only power in the world. With the ascension of China, we have two powers again. And this was very important for the Brazilian military. Between China and the United States, they stay with the United States. And they even have, and if you want to see, to look for this in the internet, YouTube, there is a general, a Brazilian general, working at the South Command. And there is this video that I don't know if you have seen this video, where the commander of the South Command receives Trump in the command. And he says, well, President, we do a very good job here. And for that, we have the collaboration of people that are not just American. And he said, please stand up. And the general from Colombia stands. And he said, we have this general here from Colombia. We don't pay him. Colombia pays for him to work for free for us. And he's very important to us. And now the Brazilian, can you imagine the Brazilians doing this? The general, Brazilian general, stand up, and he said, this is the Brazilian. He's a very clever general, and he's working for us for free, Mr. President. So that's why we are so successful. And so the guys even sent a general to work for the Americans for free. And today, they are completely aligned with the United States. And the United States sent very clear message that a coup was not going to be well received. So you can find some people, military officers, explaining to those people that were in front of the headquarters of the army, but half of those people were military, not on duty military, but relatives of military and military that had already left the army. And the guy was trying to explain why a coup was not possible to the guys that were there for 2 months. And he said, well, it's not possible. It's not possible because if we do that, all the world will close relations with Brazil. And in a question of weeks, you're going to be against us because we took power. And he did not say, we can't do that because it's against the constitution of the country. It's against law. No, he said, we can't do this because the international context does not allow.
So, João, I know you don't have a crystal ball. It's hard to predict the future in Brazil. But what do you think is the future role of the military in this new government? Has it been pacified? Is it going to reorganize? Is there danger? Is there a threat to democracy in Brazil posed by the armed forces in the immediate future?
Well, the situation is still unclear, and it depends a lot of the success of the Lula government. If Lula is able to be successful and to stabilize his government, there is a window of opportunity to try to advance a bit in the civil-military relations in Brazil. But if Lula has problems and if there is a crisis in government, the guys will return because there is no democratic conscience in the Brazilian army. They don't respect the will of the people. They think they are the moderators of the situation, and they have the last voice in everything that happens in Brazil. And this, you mentioned this, since the beginning of the Republic, they were talking about moderator power against the Supreme Court. Because Supreme Court also thought they were the moderators, and which is wrong also. But they were, there is a guy that's researching this, and he said, well, since the beginning of the Republic, the military were competing with the Supreme Court, who was to be in the Republic the moderator power. And the Republic doesn't have any moderator powers. The empire had, but the Republic doesn't have in the constitutions, in all the constitutions.
So, João, just to clarify for our listeners, the moderating power was something in the 1824 Constitution, which gave the emperor, Pedro I, power over the judiciary, executive, and legislature, having the last say in things. And the military seems to have continued to believe, in spite of the fact that it's not in the Constitution of 1891 or any of the other constitutions that have been written, they still think they have this right to play that role in society. Well, it sounds like you're not giving us either an optimistic or a negativist prediction of the future. It looks like it's an open-ended question, which means we're gonna have to call you back in the future to talk again.
No, I think Lula started in a certain sense in two different directions. First, he did not call the work group of the transitional government, which would work with defense, with military. Was the only area of government that was not did not have a work group. And he invited a man to be his Minister of Defense. He's a civilian. This is an advancement because since Temer we have generals in this position, but he is very moderate. But after January 8th, Lula was able to dismiss the ministry of the commander of the army. This is very important. And Lula was also, he made a very intelligent decision not calling the army to resolve the situation on Sunday, January 8th. He did not call an operation of law and order. And what we saw on television, because we were glued to television at this day, we saw suddenly the military police being able to control the situation. So why do we have so many operations of law and order that the Constitution allows? So the civilian government, the executive, the legislative, or the judiciary can call the army to in a certain place and in a certain period of time to install law and order. And if they were able to control a situation so difficult like that in the beginning of January, why do we call them all the time? Why do Dilma call them lots of time? Because she did not understood that was not innocent. Every time you call them, they feel themselves empowered by this situation. And you can imagine all the international press showing on Tuesday or on Monday tanks in the center of the Three Powers Square. That would be a victory for the Bolsonaristas. They would say, well, we invaded the places and the army came to resolve the situation. So the government would start in a very bad way. He did not do that. That's very important. In my opinion, he would. I think that he should just finish with the GSI, the former military cabinet of the government. Dilma did that. Dilma just finished it with those because it's a military enclave in the government, but he did not do that. So now he's playing chess with the military. Sometimes he moves, sometimes he wait for their move, and he chose a new commander of the army that seems to be a pragmatic guy. I will not say never democratic, right? But he's pragmatic. He is maybe one of the few that think that they went too far supporting the Bolsonaro. And so they lost a lot of image. And it's important to stress this. Now, both sides of the political opinion are against the military. The Bolsonaristas are against the military because they did not stage a coup. And they thought that the mission of the military in Brazil is to stage coups, to intervene in political crisis. And the left and the progressives, because they really did not pardon the military for what they did in the Bolsonaro government. So you could see in Twitter in the last days of the 2022, it's not just a prestige that the army are losing. It's prestige not the military, but the armed forces as an institution. So the most common opinion that Brazilians have about the military today, and they did this, they participated in the government, was that the mission they have is to cut grass and to paint sidewalks.
Well, João, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed the interview today. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.